As far as streaming services go, Max is still offering some of the best big budget movies you can catch on any platform. They're owned by Warner Brothers and have a huge Warner Brothers catalog as a result, but there's also a bunch of great hidden gems. In fact, they just added a bunch, and I'm going to talk about some of my favorites, starting with Criminal. I think this was criminally underrated. It stars Kevin Costner in an unusually badass role. I mean, he's played a badass before, but typically in like a Western setting. He plays a real vicious criminal in this movie, and it actually works pretty well. There's a bit of a sci-fi slant here as well. You'll see Ryan Reynolds in the trailer here. He's not actually in the movie much, but his mind is put into the mind of this vicious criminal, played by Costner, in an attempt to extract some information, track down the bad guys. Fairly simple setup, but the movie itself has kind of a unique flavor. It ends up building up towards something. I actually liked this one quite a bit for a somewhat old-fashioned thriller. There are some other big names in this movie like Gal Gadot and Gary Oldman, but you don't actually see most of them very much. Speaking of big names, Sofia Boutella, she's been in a bunch of action movies. She's really the only recognizable face in my next pick, Gaspar Noé's Climax. Now, this movie is only for people who love art films. In fact, this movie takes half of its running time with people just hanging out at a party. So dance enthusiasts will find a lot to love there, but it really is just people talking. It's mostly in French. You're gonna have to read subtitles, and it's not just people talking to advance a plot. No, it's literally just people talking. Yeah, they set up a few things, but my point is it's fairly slow, and then someone spikes the party punch with some acid, and everyone loses their minds. In fact, once the acid trip begins to kick in for this party, the camera does not cut. Now, there's a bunch of cuts early on in the movie, but again, once that acid trip starts, the camera really just follows them around, and it is total chaos. This is for people with a strong stomach, because it does get real wild, but also for people who are incredibly patient and like artistic movies like this. We've got another artsy one, and I promise there are more accessible movies on this list, but my next pick is, again, for people who love really artsy movies and don't mind being fairly confused with High Rise. This is from director Ben Wheatley, who had previously directed Kill List, another movie I recommend. Both movies are pretty dark, and I'll say High Rise is one of his more ambitious movies. It's lower budget, but really reaches for the brass ring, and as a result, it actually has some stunning cinematography, some really incredible visuals, and this high-rise building everyone's living in serves as a very obvious metaphor. Like, it's clearly a bizarre place to live, but the movie just oozes style from scene to scene. And it's got a lot of interesting elements to it, as long as you don't mind something that's very bizarre and unusual. In fact, if you've enjoyed the movies of Yorgos Lanthimos, it's Poor Things, Killing of a Sacred Deer, The Lobster, if you like his strange sense of style, then I think you'll actually really enjoy High Rise. Next up, we've got one of Robin Williams' final movies, and it's a dark one. It's actually titled World's Greatest Dad. He obviously plays a father in this movie to his son, who's just a real turd in the punch bowl, I guess is the nicest way I could put it, honestly. Meaning he's not just a kid that gets picked on and teased. No, he's awful. And when something awful happens to him, his father decides to do something somehow even more awful, I guess, morally speaking, and it works out to his benefit. That's all I'll say. It is an incredibly dark comedy. Robin Williams is great, obviously, but the points that this movie tries to make are pretty interesting, and I'll say it does look and feel like a relatively small movie for Robin Williams. It's certainly one of the smaller ones that he did. That said, though, if you do like dark comedies, particularly ones that Robin Williams has done, he's done quite a few, this is a fantastic one. Next up, I've got a cop drama that takes place in Atlanta, where I'm from, which is one of the reasons I enjoy this movie, I think, more than most audience members did, but I still had a great time with John Hillcoat's 999. Now, I say that to say this is maybe my least favorite movie of his, and that's because he's done The Proposition, The Road, and Lawless, all movies I've enjoyed more than 999. But with 999, you get a pretty decent cops and robbers movie. You follow bank robbers and you enjoy following them and their story, and it's exciting and you're sort of rooting for them, but then you're also following the police that are pursuing them, kind of like Michael Mann's Heat. Now, this movie's not nearly as good as Heat, but if you do like heist movies, particularly stuff with cops and robbers, then 999 is a fantastic one. It never really goes over the top into action movie territory. It skirts it. It ends up being much more of a drama, despite, you know, some of the action sequences in the marketing. Speaking of dramas, it didn't quite make the list because it's not really a hidden gem. It's actually fairly well known, but I'll say The Big Chill was just added to Max, and it is easily one of the best dramas on the platform right now, particularly for anyone my age and older. I could see where younger audiences might have trouble connecting with this movie culturally just because the world is such a dramatically different place. But if you like any of the actors involved in The Big Chill and you've somehow never seen it, it really is an amazing drama about some old friends. They get together after a funeral and reconnect, and it's got a lot of, you know, in terms of that stuff, it's got a lot of fantastic elements. It just wasn't really a hidden gem, but is one of the better movies just recently added to Max. Now, we've got 5 more movies to discuss on this list, but before that, I do want to tell you about how I've been getting in better shape with the help of a pretty sweet treat in today's sponsor, Magic Spoon, which is a delicious high-protein treat that tastes just like the cereals you remember from when you were a kid. Each bowl of Magic Spoon contains only 4 to 5 net grams of carbs, but 13 to 14 grams of protein with 0 sugar. And with only 140 calories per bowl, Magic Spoon has been my late-night treat of choice for a couple of years now. Magic Spoon is also soy-free, gluten-free, grain-free, and keto-friendly. For me, it's been a great way of squeezing in those extra grams of protein at the end of a long day, which has been key for, you know, building muscles, which I've been trying to do the past couple years, and it's hard to do in your late 30s. Magic Spoon comes in a bunch of familiar flavors, but if you don't want the milk, they have these treats that are super sweet and delicious, and again, packed with protein. Here's what they look like. That looks pretty familiar, right? And the cocoa flavor for Magic Spoon is really chocolatey, but tastes like cocoa, not milk chocolate. And for a limited time, my viewers get to save $5 on their first order with Magic Spoon just by using my link in the description or going to magicspoon.com/flick. If you're not sure what to get, I recommend getting a variety pack or maybe a couple boxes of the treats. Again, to save $5 on that first order, go to magicspoon.com/flick. It's a great deal on a product I love, but speaking of stuff I love, let's talk about the top 5 movies on this list. Joaquin Phoenix makes the list with his second Paul Thomas Anderson movie, Inherent Vice, a movie I will admit is not one of my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movies, but I love Paul Thomas Anderson, and I just didn't quite get Inherent Vice, and one of the reasons why is because it's about a stoner detective, and reality for him is a bit unusual. Not in a crazy way. In fact, it's kind of subtle, but it's subtle in the sense that it will confuse you. You will find yourself in different places in this movie and not be really sure how you got there. And it's because that's the experience of being this stoner detective played by Phoenix, who's great. He's funny at times, but also very serious. And obviously, like, his performances, they're not just good. It's not like he's just a convincing actor. He makes such interesting choices, and he's so fun to watch in almost every character he decides to inhabit, and this is definitely one of those characters. I'll say Josh Brolin is absolutely hilarious in this movie. It's one of my favorite characters he's ever done. Not favorite movie he's been in, but favorite characters I've seen Josh Brolin do. This one's got kind of a weird flavor I had trouble connecting with, but there's a little bit of a Big Lebowski thing in there, so if you like anything that I've said, Inherent Vice is a movie worth pursuing. Just be aware, you're watching a stoner flick that's gonna be a little cloudy. All right, next up I've got a documentary that is for movie lovers. Like, if you're like me, you grew up on movies, they kind of shaped the way you think and feel about things, you need to see the Wolfpack.
In the summer, there was more chance of us getting out. Sometimes we go out once a year.
This is like 3D, man.
It's very fresh out here. And at one particular year, we never got out at all.
Now, this is about a group of brothers, young boys, that are Hare Krishna and live under some incredibly strict circumstances. In fact, they're never really allowed to leave their New York City apartment. And as a result, they become sort of wrapped up in the world of movies. They have classic movies that they can watch. They watch them endlessly, but then start making their own movies, and it's really fun to watch and sad at the same time. It's a beautiful documentary. I mean, you've got these young boys that are essentially held prisoner in this small apartment by seemingly overbearing parents, yet they find like a way to get through it with movies, and I found that to be really, really touching, and I connected with it a lot. They're also incredibly creative. Like, they make these elaborate Batman costumes out of cardboard. It looks fantastic. And then the movie's not as sad as it sounds. Like, I hate to spoil anything, but these boys do end up going somewhere with their lives. They end up kind of escaping this, and it's kind of a joy to watch, even though a lot of this documentary can be heartbreaking as well. Now, next up, we've got a silly rom-com, and I know some of you are going to think I've lost my mind. I had one ranked at number 4 on my last list, and it's not a genre I touch on very often, but Tom Cruise did one that is loaded with Tom Cruise stunts. It also happens to star Cameron Diaz in Night and Day.
No one follows us, or I kill myself and then her.
And I'll say, this is one of Tom Cruise's most underrated movies. And that's largely because he doesn't have a lot of underrated movies, but this one is a ton of fun, almost as good as a Mission Impossible movie in terms of the stunts. And then you get kind of a silly, affable Cameron Diaz rom-com out of it as well. So it's technically even more of a crowd pleaser than Tom Cruise movies typically are. He's really silly and charming in the movie. She is as well, but they have kind of a clumsy, again, silly romance. I would say this is great for couples where one of you loves rom-coms and one of you loves Tom Cruise. You get gobs of both in Night and Day.
Hey, dude.
I can't see!
You are doing great!
See. Get out of the way!
Open the door! The beautiful dress, by the way.
Next up, I've got a cult classic, found footage fantasy film from Norway, in a movie that I've been reviewing on this channel since I started it practically, and will probably continue to recommend this movie for years, Troll Hunter. Now, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a found footage movie about people hunting for trolls, but it is incredibly well done. I mean, there are a lot of found footage movies that tend to use that structure as a crutch, or really more than a crutch. It allows you to have a low budget and create this sense of something real happening, even with little to no effects. But Troll Hunter is loaded with effects. It's loaded with big, over-the-top fantasy effects, yet it's filmed like the Blair Witch Project, and it works out so well. It's got some tense, scary moments, but it's also very light and funny, and has a lot of fun with these Nordic fairy tale origin stories. If you're good at suspending disbelief, Troll Hunter is so fun to watch. You will have to read subtitles for this one, but it's well worth it to enjoy something like this that is truly one of a kind. But then my number 1 pick on this list only gets this ranking. It only is at number 1 because Halloween is upon us, and this happens to be in an incredible cult classic anthology, Halloween-laced fun flick, Trick or Treat.
Shh,
be quiet.
why?
You'll bother the neighbors.
Okay.
Now, I know I'm not blowing a lot of your minds. This is a fairly well-known movie, but if you've somehow missed it and you like anthology movies, or really, if you're just looking for something fun and different to watch for Halloween this year, Trick or Treat is your ticket. Put it on your list. Do not miss it. All the stories take place on Halloween night. You've got people going to a costume party. You've got what seems to be a child trick-or-treating. And each of the stories leads up to a great climax. The movie's kind of colorful and fun. It's got some great cast members like Anna Paquin and Brian Cox. It's got a bunch of scares in it, a fair amount of comedy, tons of practical effects, and again, because it takes place on Halloween, it's just dripping with Halloween decorations, and it's just a real festive movie. Again, if you've never seen Trick or Treat, it should be one of the few horror movies you check out leading up to Halloween this year. Hopefully you found some good stuff to watch off of this Max list. Don't forget to check out the Magic Spoon down in the description below, but I will keep making these videos as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special Max episode, and you will see me on the next one.